What's happening, guys? Arush here, and today we're talking about components of an experiment. So today we're going to cover the control group, experimental group, the constants in an experiment, and we're also going to touch upon the independent and dependent variables one more time. So let's take a look at this. Go ahead and take note of this slide, please. The first thing that we need to have in an experiment is obviously the experimental group. The experimental group does get the experimental treatment. The experimental treatment is also called the independent variable. They're the same thing. Those two words mean the exact same thing. Okay? So the experimental group does get the experimental treatment. Then we have the control group. The control group does not get the independent variable or does not get the experimental treatment. So why do we have the control group? Well, we're going to use it as a reference. So we're going to have our experimental group and our control group, and at the end of our experiment, we're actually going to compare the two. Okay? And since the control group does not get the experimental treatment, it's going to be the normal conditions, and the experimental group should be different. That way we can measure those differences. In the experiment, we also have what's called constants. Constants are the conditions that are kept the same between the two groups. Okay? Go ahead and put this on pause and take note of this page, please. And let's go over an example of these criteria. So here's my question. Does music affect plant growth? I could do some research. I could go through Google Scholar, textbooks, go ask the ag teachers, etc. And then I'm going to form my hypothesis. Remember, I changed the question into a hypothesis, and I have those two special words in there, if and then, okay? And then I could create my experiment. This is where the two groups come in. Here's my experiment. I will have 2 peace lilies. Each one will have Miracle-Gro potting mix and will be watered every other day by a water drip for 10 minutes. One will have music played for 6 hours a day and the other will not. So if I compare these 2 different groups, they're both going to use the exact same plants, same age, same type of plants, same potting soil, same water, same amount of water. They're even going to be the same temperature, have the same amount of sunlight, except one will get music. That's the only difference, okay? All these things right here, the plant, the potting mix, the water, the sunlight, the temperature, since they're the same in both groups, those are the constants. Constants. Okay? Now, in this hypothesis, what am I introducing? What am I experimenting with? I'm experimenting with music. So that's my independent variable. And that's what the experimental group gets. What am I trying to observe or measure? I'm trying to measure the plant growth. That's my dependent variable. Okay? Now, the control group does not get the independent variable, and it's used as the reference. The experimental group does get the independent variable. And again, I line these two up side by side. There should only be one difference between the two, and that one difference is the music. That's the independent variable, okay? So let's take this experiment, for example. A race car driver wants to test a new formula of gasoline to see if it increases his acceleration. He drives a quarter mile with the original gasoline formula. Then he adds the new formula and drives another quarter mile. Both times he records his acceleration. What's the independent variable? What is this person experimenting with? Well, they're experimenting with a new gasoline. So that's my independent variable. What about the dependent variable? What is this person trying to observe or measure as the outcome? Well, they're trying to measure acceleration time. Now, what about the two groups? First, let's look for the control group, which is the one that does not get the new formula. Well, that's actually the answer. the time the person does a quarter mile with the original formula. Now what about the experimental group? That's the quarter mile the person does with the new formula, okay? Let's do another one. A doctor wants to test to see if aspirin works at reducing headaches. He organizes two groups of people. Both groups have frequent headaches. One group is given a sugar pill. The other group is given aspirin. Neither group knows if they're getting aspirin or a sugar pill. The independent variable. What is this doctor experimenting with? Well, they're experimenting with aspirin. That's the independent variable. The dependent variable. What is this doctor trying to observe or measure as the outcome? Well, they're trying to see, does aspirin reduce headaches? How about the control group? Which group of people did not get the aspirin? Well, it'd be the group that was given the sugar pill. What about the experimental group? Which group did get the experimental treatment, or the independent variable? That would be the group given the aspirin. Okay? Let's do another one. A person wants to see if feeding fish more often increases their weight. One tank of goldfish is fed the normal amount of food once a day. A second tank is fed twice a day. A third tank is fed 4 times a day during a 6-week study. The fish's weight is recorded daily. Now this one actually has several groups in there. Let's look at the independent variable. What is this person experimenting with? Feeding the fish more often. What is this person trying to measure as the outcome? That's the dependent variable. They're trying to measure the weight of the fish. Okay? Now, which group is not given the experimental treatment? Well, that would be the group that's fed a normal amount of food once a day. Okay? That's the control group, the tank that's fed the normal amount. Now, what about the experimental group? Well, there's several of them. It's the tanks that are fed 2 and 4 times a day. That's what the person's experimenting with. Okay? Let's do one more. You water 3 sunflower plants with salt water. Each plant receives a different concentration of salt solutions. A 4th plant receives pure water. After a 2-week period, the height is measured. This one's worded a little bit differently, but we can still figure this out. What's the independent variable? What is this person experimenting with? They're experimenting with salt water. What about the dependent variable? What does it look like the person is trying to measure as the outcome of the salt water? Well, they're trying to measure the height. Which group would be the control group? The one that doesn't get the experimental treatment. Well, that would be a plant that receives pure water. Lastly, the experimental group, that would be the 3 sunflowers that get salt water. Okay? All right, folks, that is it for today, and we'll cover this more next time. See you later. Bye.